Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This is a Woman podcast. And I just want to, before we dive into the podcast, I want to give a content warning that this episode, it does include discussions about sexual assault and the influence of pornography. And I wanted to give that warning, and so that way, if this is a triggering or hard topic for you, that you are not caught off guard, as well as maybe if you were listening in a car with your kids, to maybe save this episode for a time where they are not around. But with that, I have an amazing guest on today. We are going to dive into so many things. I mean, my mind was just exploding with what I was learning during this podcast, and we are diving into sexual assault. We're diving into the influence of pornography on sexual assault, children's sexual assault. We're going to dive into how this can maybe be impacting your relationship if you or your partner is viewing pornography throughout the relationship, as well as we're going to dive into how that has changed over the years, what the porn industry is benefiting off, and they're benefiting off these dopamine hits in our heads. And so it is a lot to take in, but with that, I have a phenomenal guest on, and I want to read you guys her whole bio because she is amazing. Her name is Heidi Olson. She's an RN, MSN, CPN, SANE P, and so she's a certified pediatric nurse and a certified pediatric sexual assault nurse examiner. That's what a SANE is. She is also the founder and president of Paradigm Shift Training and Consulting, which equips healthcare workers with skills-based training to be able to identify human trafficking and exploitation. Heidi has a wide range of experience in pediatric and forensic nursing and has taught as an instructor for several universities. Heidi previously managed the SANE program at Children's Mercy, Kansas City, where she performed and reviewed over 1,500 pediatric forensic exams, many of them trafficking cases, communicated with law enforcement, child protective services, and a large multidisciplinary team, as well as educated hundreds of staff members on relevant topics regarding sexual violence. Heidi also serves as an expert witness for the prosecution during trials for victims of sexual assault. In 2019, Heidi implemented an evidence-based screening process in the emergency department, which has resulted in hundreds of vulnerable children being identified as victims of exploitation. Heidi has testified in favor of bills that have been passed into law and testified at a briefing on Capitol Hill about protecting children online. Most recently, Heidi testified at the United Nations about the importance of protecting children from pornography exposure. Heidi has done groundbreaking work in sounding the alarm about the role of pornography influencing child-on-child sexual assault, and Heidi had the honor of submitting an amicus brief on this topic to the U.S. Supreme Court in January of 2025. Over the last few years, Heidi has presented hundreds of times internationally about recognizing human trafficking, child-on-child sexual assault, pornography, exploitation, and trauma-informed care. Heidi has also been featured in several documentaries regarding these topics, including Vulnerable Innocence, which has won 24 awards. Heidi won the Cry Purple Award in 2023, which is given to citizens who are doing outstanding anti-trafficking work in their communities. Heidi is also the survivor of sexual abuse and is living proof that healing is possible. One of her greatest joys is supporting other survivors as they navigate their healing journeys. And so with that, let's dive right into it. Well, hello, Heidi, and welcome to This is a Woman podcast. We are so excited and grateful to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yes. And so, Heidi, all the listeners just heard your wonderful bio, and I'm just trying to figure out how one person can get all that stuff done and do everything that you're doing. But I really want to dive into, you are a certified pediatrician nurse and a certified pediatric SANE nurse. So that's a sexual assault nurse examiner. That's not a normal everyday job. Can you share a little bit about what that job is and what you're actually doing through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So sexual assault nurse examiners, or SANE nurses, is often what we're called because it's such a mouthful. And we love acronyms in the medical world. So, you know, what we do, it's this very unique niche type of nursing. Most people have not heard of it. And if you have, it's because you've intersected with the criminal justice system, likely. So it's not always a pleasant thing to think about or talk about. But what we do specifically is we collect evidence after someone's experienced a sexual assault. So if you think about it, when someone has experienced any type of an assault where there's been some type of body part touching another body part, the perpetrator is going to leave some type of DNA, whether that's skin cells, hair cells, saliva, semen. So we're trying to collect that evidence to corroborate a victim's disclosure. But also because, right, we're interacting with people, we want them to feel safe and seen and heard. It's not just about evidence collection. It's about making sure there aren't any medical issues like sexually transmitted infections, or injuries or, things like that. And then also just holding space when someone's experienced trauma. So when we have, patients who are disclosing something that's been really hard, we're sitting there and saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I believe you. You deserve to feel safe. And being just a safe place for them to be able to share what they've experienced, which is huge. Of course, I'm working specifically with kids. So we're offering support to families. And then we are making sure that they have resources before they leave the hospital. So for therapy or, for whatever may be going on, whatever vulnerabilities are happening in their world. And then we work closely with the criminal justice system. So of course we're reporting because we're working with kids, what has happened, what disclosures we have, what evidence we found. We're giving all of that to law enforcement and child protective services. And then occasionally we get subpoenaed to testify in different hearings and trials, kind of depending on where the case goes. So in a nutshell, that's what SANEs do. There are SANEs who specifically take care of adults, and then there are SANEs who take care of kids. And then there's kind of that in between where both types of nurses will take care of adolescents. So adolescents can kind of receive care in either category. But in a nutshell, that is what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And I'm based in Kansas City, so I'm in the Midwest. It's been an honor to be able to do that type of nursing for so long.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, truly doing the Lord's work and working in an environment that a lot of people wouldn't be able to work in or wouldn't know how to do it that well. And, Heidi, we had you out in California to testify at the state capitol on an age verification bill for online pornography. And so people listening right now might be like, wait, she just said she was a SANE nurse. What does that have to do with online pornography? And, even when you were talking right now about being a SANE nurse, I'm thinking, okay, it's horrible to have to deal with and have the fact that there's children that are being sexually assaulted. Your mind starts thinking, oh, it must be by like that random school teacher, that coach, or the random guy at the park, or these things. But there was a statement you made when testifying at the state capitol in California that said, the age range most likely to commit sexual assault right now are 11 to 15-year-old males. So can we just walk through that? I mean, you're having to deal with children being sexually assaulted. Or is it mostly adults, or is it really happening? These 11 to 15-year-old males are the ones.
Yeah, so I feel like this is the best kept secret that exists, where oftentimes when people think about childhood sexual abuse, there is this stereotype of stranger danger, right? That the perpetrator is cruising up in a white van and, luring a kid in with candy or whatever and, whisking them away. That happens a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the time where there's some kind of abduction or kidnapping. That's almost never what child sexual abuse looks like. About 90% of the time, kids know their perpetrator and have a trusted relationship with them, whether it's a parent, some other caregiver, family member, teacher, coach, whoever it may be, pastor. It's someone who's in a trusted position or, is in a familial position. So there's easy access there. However, when I started seeing patients, just probably a month out of orientation. So we would write down the ages of the perpetrators so we could collect, data and statistics. And what I realized very early on is the age of the offenders I'm writing down are kids, right? So the one who's committed the sexual assault, I'm writing down 11, 12, 13, just over and over. And I was like, why didn't anyone tell me that this is the trend that I was going to be seeing? That it's not, always this 60-year-old adult. In fact, a lot of times it's a child who's committed the assault. And so I did a deep dive because I wanted to know what is happening. Why are there so many kids committing sexual assaults? Is this just a trend in the Midwest? Like what is going on? So what I started to find is kind of depending on the data I would pull from our hospital at any given year, anywhere from a third to half of those committing sexual assaults are kids themselves. And when we break down the age ranges, it's exactly what you said. It's 11 to 15-year-old males who make up the largest age range of people committing sexual assaults against kids. And there are other studies that back that up. And this is a global phenomenon. So it's not just in the Midwest, it's all over the United States and all over the world. The UK actually released data last year showing that over 50% of their perpetrators are now minors, and they contribute. So the tie to pornography and what I was talking about with the age verification bill is when you look at why, right? That's the $1 million question. Why are so many kids committing sexual assaults? There's lots of reasons. So it is multifaceted. I definitely want to make that clear that kids can commit or engage in problematic sexual behavior for various reasons, whether that's their own sexual trauma, attachment pain, inability to control compulsions, but pornography is always a piece of the pie. So there's also some element of pornography exposure that's also contributing to the issue. And sometimes it's the only risk factor we can find. So you may have a kid and we're looking at their history of why did they commit this assault, and it's access to violent porn. And of course it makes sense, right? If kids have mirror neurons in their brain, they're going to act out what they're seeing. So if we have kids who are accessing porn over and over and over and over and over again for years, eventually they're going to act out what they're seeing. So they were exposed to it at the age of 8. Now at 14, it's actually not a surprise if there's been no intervention that now they're acting out the violent scenes that they've been watching for years and years. And so I think the problem's being exacerbated by so many kids having access to pornography, and almost zero adults talking about it.
Oh my goodness. And you made a good point. It's a multifaceted thing. There's different things that can play into it. But, I like when you watch those like Criminal Minds shows or the Menendez brother case, like when you see the young child sexually assault another child, the first thing it goes to is, okay, who's sexually assaulting this child? Which obviously like still is true. And there's all these different facets that play into it. But I think there has been that switch that you're talking about where it's, okay, this child might not necessarily be also getting sexually assaulted. What pornography are they watching? And I think that's a rise and change of the times with our phones and social media and the access to porn, basically 24/7, whenever on a computer and phones. But a lot of people listening right now, if they're moms or grandmas listening, and they're like, you just said 11 to 15-year-old males are committing sexual assault because of the pornography they're watching. And they're thinking, my 11-year-old son's not watching that. They're like, no, that there's no way that could be happening. Is there data, or are you seeing anything about what age children are beginning to be exposed to pornography nowadays?
So any child that has a device that is connected to the internet is at risk for seeing pornography. It doesn't matter how old they are. And so at any given time, kids are about 2 to 3 clicks away from pornography if they're online, especially if it's not being monitored, if there's not filters, if there are not parameters in place to filter this and block this content, they're going to see it. And so studies show the average age that kids are exposed to pornography is 11 years old. I've seen kids much younger than that be exposed to pornography. So we took care of a 12-year-old female who had been sexually assaulted by a 16-year-old male. It's a really violent, really awful assault. She had met him online, and she didn't think she had been sexually abused. She could not connect the dots that what had happened to her was wrong. And so our nurse asked her about pornography, because we've done a ton of training connecting the dots for our staff. And she was like, oh yeah, my parents gave me an iPad when I was 5. I accidentally stumbled on porn. I've been looking at and masturbating to porn every single day for the last 7 years. And if I don't, it feels like my brain's on fire, right? So we got this kid who's describing a porn addiction, who's a female, who's 12 years old, right? Because she accidentally saw it at a very young age, and now it's rewired her brain. And because of that, she's been seeing violent images for so long, she can't even recognize what's happening to her is violating and exploiting her. And so, I think there are these stereotypes, right? That females won't look at pornography. It's only boys, and it's maybe going to be teenage boys, but that's normal. And, we kind of have all these myths around it, when the reality is any kid can be exposed to it if we're not monitoring what they're doing online. It's boys and girls. Girls are the fastest growing demographic of porn users right now. So we have to be on guard. And you could have the best kid in the world, right? And they could still be exposed to porn. For most kids, it's accidental the first time they see it. But of course, it's going to spark curiosity. And if we're not having conversations, they may be going back and watching it over and over again because there's no one helping them guide what to do. We're not having conversations. And so a lot of kids are at risk for being exposed and for re-exposure if we're not being proactive as parents and adults.
And I think it's such an important point that you know as parents watching. A lot of times the first time is an accident. And I mean, it really is like, you can be scrolling. I've seen stories where it's like a parent was sitting down with like their daughter, son, and they're looking up a different like princess character online. And then all of a sudden there's like this like porn version of this princess character. And it's like, what child is looking up just like Cinderella on their own? And it's like Cinderella like in the castle, and all of a sudden it's something extremely inappropriate. And so just for parents to be so aware of what they're actually handing their children over when they give them a phone. It's not just a way to text and call mom and dad anymore. There's so much more to it. With that, because we are seeing the huge rise of pornography use in women and girls, are you seeing that when a child-on-child sexual assault is happening, is it mostly males committing the sexual assault of females, and then maybe just like you said, females not even recognizing it? Or is there any trends we're seeing with that?
Yeah, there's definitely trends. So when you look at problematic sexual behavior with kids, it's actually girls at a younger age who are acting out with problematic sexual behavior. And then sort of as we're getting into puberty, it switches to boys who become the offenders, which is interesting. But again, I've seen teenage girls who have sexually assaulted other kids. So again, it's not completely out of the realm of possibilities that can happen. But if we're talking more of the tween teenage years of kids committing sexual assaults against other kids or younger kids or their peers, it's, yes, trend-wise, primarily boys. With girls, I think what we're seeing is they are failing to recognize that what's happening is abuse. They think strangulation is normal. They think sexual violence is normal. They think people asking for nudes is normal. And I think the way we're really seeing it affect teenage girls is this message of self-exploitation has been so normalized. Mm-hmm. So maybe boys are engaging in sexual violence, but for girls, it's all that matters about you is you're hot. And so I talked to a school resource officer, and he said, I hear girls in my schools say only ugly girls get diplomas. And what they're meaning is when I turn 18, I'm going to join OnlyFans and create porn and make a ton of money, and I don't have to finish high school. And if you do, it's because you're ugly and no one wants to see you in pornography. So it's become so normalized with teenage girls that it's actually now a goal, right? I want to exploit myself because there's currency in that. That makes me cool. That gives me value. Whereas with boys, I think it's more they're engaging in the sexual violence, consuming their peers, where the girls are saying like, I am empowered by exploiting myself. And, there's obviously damage to both sides of that.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on like the violence angle you were sharing. Obviously, anytime there's a sexual assault happening that's violent, that's not okay. It's completely wrong. But I think a parent or adult listening, and maybe if they watch pornography in their past, or their mindset of pornography is maybe very different than what pornography actually is today, and the violence that's coming from it. Because you think about it, if it's a child-on-child sexual assault and it's a 12 or 13-year-old boy, it's a horrible situation. That boy should never be doing that. But there's probably a high chance that boy isn't a violent person, but thinks what he's doing is normalized. So can we dive into like the violence in that, what porn actually is looking like, or what children are thinking is okay, is sexually okay?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad you brought that up because this is when kids are seeing porn online, they're not seeing Playboy from 30, 40 years ago. This is not like print-based porn that a lot of adults grew up seeing or, have seen in adulthood. Internet porn is completely different. So what a child is going to see, right, when they're 2 clicks away, say they just type girls into their Google browser because they're curious. And curiosity is not bad. It's normal. The result that they're getting online, though, is not, their brains are not ready for what they're going to see. And so say they type girls in and up pops a whole bunch of porn. Think about the porn industries. They're setting algorithms for men who have been consuming internet porn for the last 10 or 20 years. We know that porn is addicting. So what happens is when we look at pornography, we get this huge dopamine hit in our brain, feels good. We want to go back and look at it again and do it again and do it again and do it again. The porn industry it thrives because of that dynamic. And so what they're trying to do for their consumers is give them this huge dopamine hit. So when your brain gets used to something, you have to look at things that are more violent, more deviant, so more out of the box to get that same dopamine hit. So for the 40-year-old male who's been looking at internet porn since he was, 15, 20, however old, he's probably viewing extremely violent, degrading pornography because his brain's wanting that dopamine hit. So when the 8-year-old types Google or girls into his Google browser, he's going to see what the 40-year-old is, the algorithm set for the 40-year-old, and it's going to be extremely violent and very degrading. We know that the vast majority of pornography scenes show violence against women. So an 8-year-old boy is watching this is mainstream. This is not hardcore porn that I'm about to describe. They're going to see oftentimes strangulation, women being hit, slapped, hair pulled, really violent gagging, multiple men penetrating one woman, ejaculation on the face, name calling. It's extremely degrading. Pornography today is not about showing mutuality or intimacy or anything like that. It's about getting that dopamine hit. So that requires high levels of violence, high levels of novelty. And so, of course, there are so many genres of porn that are just horrific, that include torture, animals, children, things like that people are seeking out. And kids see this stuff. And so I think we have to know when a child sees pornography, it can be very traumatic what they're watching. It's not just, oh, I saw a naked person online. They may be watching something that looks like rape.
Yeah, it actually makes like my blood boil thinking about that and thinking about like the industry profiting off of this and like looking into the fact that there's dopamine hits, and it's like the fact that they're like realizing what they have to do to continue to profit makes me like, I'm sure everyone listening to is probably just beyond angry. It's like they're willing to show children this, to show the public this, to normalize this behavior just for all the profit they're making. And so, I mean, could be a whole other podcast episode, the deep dive of the porn industry and all the money there and what's going on. But with that, and I know you already shared one, but is there any maybe other specific cases or stories, while obviously maintaining the confidentiality, that really highlight this growing issue? Like, I think maybe there might be someone listening right now that's like, okay, like Heidi, like maybe that was just like a one-off case you had, or it's only happened 2 or 3 times. Can you maybe give us some numbers and maybe a couple examples?
Sure. I can give you so many. We could be here for the rest of the day. I'll tell you about my first case where I connected the dots because I'll never forget it. I was taking care of a 5-year-old female, and she had been assaulted by her 12-year-old brother. And their dad had actually walked in and seen what had happened. So there was no question, about it being an assault, about it being, completely inappropriate and violent. So the 5-year-old was in the hospital seeking treatment. And as I was talking to the parents, who of course were devastated. I mean, I have so much grace and empathy for parents who are trying to navigate this, where one sibling has assaulted another. It has to be one of the worst situations, to walk through. So we were talking, and I was like, have you noticed any changes with your 12-year-old? Because the parents are trying to figure out, right, like what happened that he did this? Like, we don't understand. And so the mom was like, I don't know if this is related, but we gave him a phone about a year ago and he's just been isolating. He just goes in his room and shuts the door. He doesn't want to play soccer anymore. And we have found all this violent porn on his phone. And I was like, ding, like light bulb went off of like, of course, he's showing signs of problematic porn use. He's isolating. He's not interested in things he used to be interested in. His behaviors are changing. And they have evidence, right, that he is consuming really violent material. Now he's acted it out on his sibling. And again, that could be one of those dopamine seeking things, right? Oh, it's not enough what I'm watching. Now I'm having the urge to want to try this with someone else. So to your point of what you were saying earlier, do I think these kids know they're committing a sexual assault? Sometimes no. I think they're following the script that they've been given by the porn industry. And like how traumatizing and detrimental is that to everyone who's involved? So that case for me was really, really eye-opening to kind of connect the dots. And that trend it hasn't changed in the last 10 years in terms of just the amount of kids who are sexually assaulting their siblings. So like I said, depending on the given year, almost half of our patients will be assaulted by another child. And again, the stats are very similar around the world and in the United States, but I think it's growing. And we'll hear kids who directly connect pornography to their assault. So we took care of a 13-year-old who was raped by her 16-year-old brother. And I remember she said, he came into my room and he said, I was looking at porn and I can't stop thinking about it before he started his assault. So there we have this causational relationship. I'm looking at it. Now I'm acting it out. We also have a lot of kids who are creating their own pornography. So again, I'm watching it. I'm thinking that this is cool or acceptable or whatever. I want attention from it. And so we took care of an 11-year-old boy who was sexually assaulted by his 14-year-old cousin. And the 14-year-old was so incredibly violent to this 11-year-old boy. He had horrific genital injuries. The 14-year-old live streamed it on Instagram. So I see a lot of that, a lot of assaults that are being shared on Snapchat, Instagram, all Discord, tons of other apps where, so not only is porn influencing the offender, they're creating their own pornography now. And of course, kids don't realize they're creating child sexual abuse materials or what we used to call child pornography and distributing it. Like, I'm sure it's not going through their head of like, I've just committed a federal offense. But I'm acting out what I'm seeing. And so there's, just huge problems with that we're seeing with kids as well. I could tell you stories for the rest of the day, which I know it's highly traumatic to hear about all of this, but it's, to your point, it's not a one-off. It's extremely normalized. And yet I think because there's so much shame intertwined with all of it, no one wants to talk about it, right? Like, who wants to be the parents? It's like, yeah, my kid committed a sexual assault. So do you want to let him hang out with your family, right? So I think there's a lot of shame in all of it. And I also want to say, I don't think that these are bad kids, right? I think there is just, the porn industry is predatory. They want lifelong customers. So if we can expose kids at an early age and get them hooked, then they will be looking at porn and paying for porn for the rest of their life is what they're hoping, which is disgusting and evil, truly. And so I think these kids are a victim of what we have allowed culturally and socially. And so I'm not in here saying like, these are terrible kids and there's no hope for them. There's absolutely hope for them. And we know that if kids get help and therapy with problematic sexual behaviors, the rates at which they'll reoffend are less than 3%. So there is hope and help, but it's devastating what is happening. And a lot of these kids, there isn't help being offered or even conversations.
And I want to dive into kind of, because again, the porn industry is predatorial. They're very much allowing this to happen, influencing this to happen. And so I do want to dive into maybe some like policies or legal measures. And I know you wrote an amicus brief to the Supreme Court and things like that. But before we hit that, I feel like I don't have children, but if I was like a parent of like teenagers right now, I would be like, I'm going to pause this podcast episode and go take their phones away. Like, I'd be freaking out right now. So I guess first, to any parents listening or anyone that's listening that wants to be a parent one day, what advice would you maybe give to them? Because I mean, it is really hard to not have your child have a phone till they're 18, but what practical advice would you give to them to try to stop this from happening, or maybe put some barriers that make it harder for their child to walk into porn?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really great question. So there's a couple of things. One, I want you to parent from a place of hope and not a place of fear. I know everything I'm saying strikes this fear chord, right? I'm like, no. I want you to have all of the facts, which is why I'm going on a deep dive of what's truly happening, but also to parent from a place of, if we have conversations, if we're a safe spot for our kids, if they feel like they can talk about this stuff, it starts to greatly decrease the risk of this happening to them. Or if they see porn, that you're able to have a conversation with them about it. So really the main takeaways I would have for parents and caregivers is start talking to your kids about porn as early as you can. Age 3 or 4 is not young enough. And kids don't have to understand sex to be able to talk to them about porn. So for example, with a 4-year-old, you can say to them, if you see pictures or movies of people with no clothes on, come and tell me, please. Like, that's not good for you. I don't want you to see that. Please come and tell me. So we're identifying what porn is without even using the word, and you're giving them a solution. Please come talk to me, right? So you can figure out what's going on, where they've seen it, where there's access to it, right? So you can start off just with simple things like that, and then have deeper conversations as they get older. It's going to be awkward the first time, probably, especially if, say, you have a 15, 16-year-old and you're like, well, now is it too late? No, it's never too late. I have found, so I talk to a lot of the patients that I've taken care of about pornography. They want to talk about it. No adults are talking about it. So there's almost a sense of relief of like, oh, you get it. Like, this is happening in our world and I don't know how to navigate it. And so I think, yes, you don't have to do it perfectly, even if it's kind of awkward. There are some amazing resources that already exist that are very, very helpful. There's one group called Culture Reframed. They've scripted out conversations. So if you're like, I don't even know what to say to my kids, it's already printed out for you. And it's super helpful. They've done a great job. There's another one called I think it's called Empower Educate Kids, or maybe the other way around. I have to look it up, but they have a great little pamphlet. I've read it multiple times, and it's super helpful. It's for kids ages 6 to 18 about what do you do? How do you have these conversations? Really easy. And truly, it's just starting to open the door to having the conversation. It's better to have 100 1-minute conversations than just one long conversation and never revisiting it.
Yeah.
I think, already seen pornography. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. Stay calm. We don't want to shame them. And again, just opening the door to, how did that make you feel? Do you have any questions about what you saw? And helping them process, and then figuring out a plan, right? Okay, they saw porn at their friend's house. How do we put protective parameters in place so that doesn't happen again? And to know, if kids are around friends that have devices that are not filtered, you can do an awesome job with your kid. You cannot protect them from every place they could possibly see porn. So I think the goal shouldn't be that my kid is never, ever going to see porn. The goal should be, if they see it, they know what to do. They know to, shut down their device, come talk to me. So that when they are 18 and off on their own and whatever, they have a foundation for how to handle this and name it and navigate it. But that being said, please put filters and all of the parental controls on your kids' devices. There's a group called Protect Young Eyes, and they walk you through tons of different ways to do that. So instead of using all of your time on here to walk through it, because it's complex with some of the different devices that exist, look it up and see how to put parental controls on the devices your kids have, because they need all the layers that we can give them.
Absolutely. And I think the importance of having those like little conversations, like you said, there's probably children and teenagers out there that are struggling with a porn addiction and don't want to be, and want help and freedom from that. But they're like, how do I talk to my mom and dad about this? This is awkward. This is weird. We've never talked about anything like this. And so if you're a household where you have talked about this and all that, I just feel like that opens the door for the kid to go, hey mom, hey dad, I know we've talked about this and I'm struggling with this right now. Having those open conversations, I think, makes such a difference. And so I love the way you even approached how to talk to a 4-year-old about it, because I think about it like you can watch like a movie just on Netflix nowadays, and you're just watching a normal movie, and all of a sudden it's like, is this porn on my TV? And it's a normal movie that's rated like PG-13. And so it really is everywhere. So really just learning how to age appropriately, talk with your children is so important. But with that, also, what are we seeing, Heidi, maybe policy-wise, that you think are good ways to combat this issue?
Yes. Okay. Let me back up. Two things came to mind as you were talking about Netflix. Two other ways that I see kids being exposed to porn a lot that parents may not think about. They get exposed through social media in all these different ways. It's not just going to a porn site, but another way is through hentai, which is manga and anime porn. Mm-hmm. And so it's cartoon porn, but it's extremely violent. It's also very degrading, sending the same messages as, filmed porn. So a lot of kids will be interested in anime or manga, and they're looking up those images and hentai pops up. So to know that it's one of the most searched genres every single year. And I think kids contribute to a lot of that. But another one is erotic novels. I hear that a lot from females that say as teenage girls, they started reading, these different fantasy novels that are highly sexualized. It made them want to then Google, right, and see kind of the fantasy that they're reading about. And then that was sort of what opened the door for them to start looking at pornography. So there's lots of ways kids are being exposed, but policy-wise, yes. Okay, circle back to this. So I've testified in multiple states at this point who want to implement age verification. I think age verification is a great idea because it's one more layer of protection. So for all the accidental exposures, it's going to greatly decrease that. Is it a perfect solution? No. Like there are ways to get around age verification right now, like using a VPN, things like that. So it's not this perfect way, but it's like, if this decreases the 4 and 5-year-olds from accidentally being exposed, yes, why don't we do it? But it is incredible the amount of pushback that comes from billion-dollar corporations when there are any policy bills around like just more accountability for things like the App Store, devices, filters, age verification. I'm telling you, you've got Google, Meta, Apple, Pornhub. I mean, just the Free Speech Coalition, which is the lobbying arm of the porn industry. They come in with their $1,000 an hour lobbyists to muddy the water. And so it's challenging passing these bills. The one in California did not pass last year that we had testified on. And it's interesting. I think there were a lot of conversations happening behind closed doors with those organizations that shut it down. So I think we have Utah has passed some really incredible legislation. If you kind of want to look at examples for protecting kids online in general, but especially from pornography, they really have set the bar. But to get it done, in my experience, has been so hard. So I live in Missouri. We still haven't passed age verification laws, even though I've testified on it. I don't know how many years in a row now. There's a lot of misinformation about how it works, how age verification works. And then I think a lot of lawmakers will sort of throw it back on, well, it's on the parents. Why can't they control their kids? Just not understanding the true nature of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for all of you that are listening that are like, I don't know if I even want to have kids now with how crazy the world is, or those that are listening that are like, what do I do with my children? Do I lock them in like a white wall room and call it a day? Like, I want you guys to know that there's people like Heidi and California Family Council and all that on the back end that are like working on legislation, getting good things passed, and Heidi's bringing a light to this. And people like Heidi and people like CFC and all these people that are doing stuff are going to continue to keep doing it. But I think it all goes back to like, no matter, Heidi kind of like stated this, no matter how many safeguards you put in place, like you can't stop if your son is in the locker room at school and the boys have it going. You can't stop if your daughter goes to a sleepover and they're watching a movie that has these porn scenes or different things. And so I think it really all stems back to having those conversations with your children. And so they know what to do amidst it. But with that, Heidi, it's not only an issue, like there might be some high school or college age girls listening right now, and they're like, well, this doesn't really affect me right now. Like, I'm not going to have kids for years. Like, maybe there'll be better, like, policies in place and things like that. But I think this can still be currently affecting them without them realizing. And that goes back to maybe their sexual relationships, even with their boyfriend, or if like I've made clear on this podcast, I think sex is a beautiful thing between a man and woman in marriage. And so like that, but I'm not going to be ignorant and not acknowledge that boyfriends and girlfriends and relationships aren't having sexual relationships. What are maybe like a few ways a boy or girl can kind of realize, oh, my sexual relationship with my significant other is being impacted because of the other person's using porn?
Yeah, that's such an incredible question because so I'm a millennial, and so internet porn was widely accessible by the time that I was in college. So of course, it's 1,000 times more accessible and worse today, unfortunately, but that was still a thing, right, back when I was in college. So even the ripple effects and ramifications back then were becoming apparent, and it has just escalated in so many ways. So if we look at stats, even among church-going, Christians, the rates of porn use are so high, even among pastors. So because pornography is extremely degrading and it's all about consuming another person. So if we think about sex, you're saying like, right, in the context of how God designed it, where it's supposed to be about intimacy and mutuality. Porn is the opposite of that. It's about me. It's about what I want. And I don't see you as another person. I see you as an object. There are actually researchers who scanned the brains of men who were looking at porn. And what they found is the parts of their brain lit up that are related to objects, not humans, when they're looking at porn. So when we're viewing another human being through that lens of, you're here to meet my sexual needs, I see you as an object, that's setting a really dangerous precedent for a relationship, whether we realize it or not. And unfortunately, I think so many men and women, no matter if you're growing up in, right, like a church going home, conservative home, whatever it may be, so much of our culture has been pornified. And so many people are looking at pornography because it does give us that dopamine hit. We use it as a coping mechanism. So what I'm trying to say is a lot more people are impacted by this than we talk about or realize. Porn addiction is just through the roof with adults, and it creates so much trauma in a relationship. I can not even count on my two hands the amount of women that I know in my own personal life who have experienced betrayal trauma, where they married someone and their spouse was lying to them and looking at porn for years and years and years. And what happens, right, it affects that partner. You're comparing their body to what you're seeing in porn. You want them to have sex the way that it happens in porn. You do not see them as a human. You do not see them as an equal. So there's just so many ripple effects that happen, I would say, in relationships. So if you're dating someone, if you're in a relationship and you have a gut feeling like something isn't right, or I'm not comfortable with this, or I feel like they have contempt for me, they don't respect me, they don't see me as an equal partner, it's entirely possible porn is playing part in all of this. I think for males and females. So again, right, females are, like we talked about, are the highest growing demographic of porn consumers. And so I think for females, also what it creates is I should accept these things. Right? I should accept the violence. I should accept the being degrading. I should be the porn star, have the porn star sex, instead of what does a healthy relationship actually look like? And I think it's so unfortunate that we don't have more support or conversations around all of this. So I will quickly tell you my own story. When I was in college, a friend who went to church with me, right? I met him through a trusted friend. So again, when we think about predators, this wasn't stranger danger. This was someone I trusted, introduced me to this person who seemed really normal at first. And what I didn't know at the time is he had been exposed to porn at the age of 10. So we're 20 at this point. So he's got a decade of viewing violent porn under his belt. And he was absolutely a sexual predator, does so much grooming and sexual violation over the course of a year and a half. And I started to connect the dots. He started talking about porn. His addiction was so out of control that instead of going to class, like the rest of us were doing in college, he would stay in his apartment and just look at pornography and masturbate all day long. And he assaulted multiple females. I later found out. So his addiction was just completely out of control. When I disclosed that, there was such a lack of understanding around porn addiction, around how that influences sexual violence. It was handled so terribly. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if there's anything I could still instill into people who maybe are on the receiving end of being in a relationship or have been harmed by someone's porn addiction, it's traumatizing. It absolutely is traumatizing. You deserve support and help. And even for the person struggling with addiction, you deserve support and help. And I think we're just not having these conversations enough.
Absolutely. And I know this might not necessarily be in your exact realm, but maybe is there a way that you thought of for people in relationships where they kind of have that gut feeling like, oh, this might be going on? Is there a good way to even bring that conversation up? Because that's not an easy or fun conversation to have, but a lot of people don't know how to have it.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's so important to talk about, especially if you are wanting to continue dating or being in a committed relationship with someone. In today's day and age, you have to ask about porn. You have to. And I often, for my friends that are dating, I'm like, so have you asked them about porn yet? Because it's so important and indicative of where your relationship is going to go and how healthy it's going to be. And so, of course, people can be dishonest about their porn use. But I would say, just as a rule of thumb, to once you feel comfortable enough to say, hey, here are my views on pornography. I think it can be really objectifying. This is how I've done in the past. I think it can be really objectifying and degrading. And these are trends I personally have seen as a forensic nurse. I'm not okay with it. How do you feel about it? I've had various response. I've had people who have never asked me on a date again after we had that conversation. So that tells you everything, right? But I've also had men that are like, I never thought about that. That's a great point. Like, I don't think it's okay or healthy either. And so trust your gut. Even if they're like, yeah, I'm on board with you, but you're still feeling like something is off, it's completely, totally legit that probably something is off. And I'm not saying you need to go down the rabbit trail of like, look at their phone and X, Y, and Z, but there's going to be red flags. There are going to be things that don't feel right and don't seem right.
All right. Well, all of you listening now, you have to ask, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite dessert? And what are your thoughts on porn? Those are now the 3 first date questions. No. Obviously, approach it like Heidi said, not like how I said. But Heidi, as we're wrapping up, is there any other thing that you really wish more people understood about this issue, or something that you really want people to take away from listening to you?
Yeah, I think that it's important, especially with kids, to reiterate curiosity about sex is so normal. And, I think if anyone grew up I grew up in the purity culture world, right? So curiosity about sex was not that was not okay, actually. There was a lot of shame around all things sex. And so that actually, research has found, exacerbates porn addiction. When shame is this driving factor in a community or a culture, no one's going to ask for help if they're struggling with porn addiction. Mm-hmm. And so it's really healthy to say, to kids, hey, of course you're curious about sex, right? Like, you were made to be curious about this. What questions do you have for me as a parent so I can give you healthy guidance? And talking about healthy sexual intimacy versus, nope, we're just going to shut it down. That's going to drive them right to Googling and wondering about things. And so I think for parents, just even thinking about, why do I feel uncomfortable with this topic? Why am I afraid to approach it? And work on your own healing in this regard is going to make it easier for kids to open up to you. And so I think if you grew up in a similar community where it's like, there's so much shame, I don't know how to approach it, really healing that and thinking about how you want to do it differently with your kids is going to be incredibly impacting.
Amazing. Yes, I definitely think it's something that I have harped on a lot just with church and purity culture, that the church has failed in the way they've talked about it, especially with women. And I have seen the tides turning, but I think we'll see kind of from our generations a better approach to it with children and how to open doors for more conversations. Because like you said, if they're not getting it from you as a parent, they are getting it from their classmates, from social media, from Google search. Like, they're going to keep looking for those answers. But Heidi, thank you so much for coming on. I will put this in the show notes for everyone to see, but what is the best way if people want to follow along with more with what you're doing and what you're up to? Where can they head to?
Yeah, absolutely. So where I post probably the most is LinkedIn. So you could just look up my name, Heidi Olson. And then I also have a website. It's called ParadigmShiftTC.com. And you can go there if you want to set up a meeting or just want to see more about what I'm up to or read different articles. There's tons of resources there about what we've talked about today.
Amazing. Perfect. So that will be in the show notes, everyone. So you can find it. You can check out more of Heidi's stuff. But Heidi, thank you so much for literally everything that you do. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.